So in today's video we're going to be discussing the seemingly controversial topic of the most natural diet for humans, which I would argue should not be controversial at all, and I'm going to explain why. So I recently noticed over the internet I seem to be getting all sorts of adverts for this real meat cat food. I get a lot of adverts for cat foods, probably because I look at cute pictures of cats. I don't know, I don't actually have a cat. The internet thinks I do. Anyway, this advert, you may wonder what this has to do with anything, but bear with me. This advert was pointing out that cats are designed in every way to eat meat. Therefore, the only natural diet for cats is meat. Now, you may or may not know that supermarket cat food mostly consists of junk. It's sort of bread with a bit of meat thrown in. And this is no use for cats, has no nutritional value, just makes them feel full and doesn't actually feed them. So this advert was sort of arguing that, you know, the only food you should be feeding your cat is meat. Well, that's very obvious. I think we can all agree that we know cats are clearly designed to eat meat and only meat. And yet, you see the same people who would be very happy to accept that struggling with the idea that, well, what are humans supposed to eat? How can we possibly know? We've got all these different sources of information, different people telling us this diet is healthy or this diet, and we don't know, we just don't know what we're supposed to eat. Well, you can apply the same logic that you would apply to a cat, or anything else for that matter, to humans. Now, there's, I would say, two obvious sources of information that we can use to determine the natural diet for a species. First very obvious way is to look at their biology. What food are they adapted to eat? Now, this is extensively used in paleontology, for example. We know that if we dig up a dinosaur and its teeth looked like this, then it ate other dinosaurs. If they look like this, then it ate tough vegetation. So just based on the teeth alone of an animal, it tells us most of what we need to know about about what their diet was. Now, in the case of domesticated animals like cats, we have another source of information as well, because we can look at their wild ancestors and relatives and see what they eat. Now, humans are surely the ultimate domesticated animals. We don't have any of our direct relatives still living for comparison, but we do have a lot of their other descendants, so a lot of our close cousins. And if you look at other primates, you will see a predominance of eating fruit. When you think of the classic monkey eating a banana, that's what we're talking about. Now, I know there are going to be some little bright sparks who try and point out, well, yeah, but gorillas eat leaves, and what about chimpanzees? Some chimpanzees have been observed hunting monkeys and eating them. Now, this is true. However, I would always point out a cautionary tale of looking at other species. Yes, it can be useful, but it's also worth remembering that animals do not always do the things that are best for them. I think humans are excellent evidence of that. But I'm thinking also of, for example, the elephants who surround a fruit tree, allow the fruit to fall, and then guard it from any other animals until it ferments into alcohol, and then they eat that and get drunk. Now, observing this behaviour, would we say that, well, you see, alcohol is obviously the best food for elephants to be eating? Probably not. It's fun. And it probably also fulfills some kind of social element as well. In the case of chimpanzees, some chimpanzee groups have been observed, and it's always the males, apparently, going off, and it's almost like a ritualistic activity of hunting monkeys and then eating them. They're actually too close for comfort, I always feel, because it's very human-like when you watch it. And it is apparently a very sort of social activity. You know, if you were going to take a sort of functionalist perspective, you could argue about the function that fulfills, but sociology is not the topic of today's lecture. So, we'll park that one. Moving on to think the most important way of telling the natural diet of a species is to look at their biology and to look at all elements of the digestive system. So their teeth is the most obvious one, but you can also look at other things. You know, what kind of bacteria do they have in their intestines? What is the general sort of length and process of the digestive system? What kind of enzymes do they have in their stomach? And all of these things will tell us what that animal is designed, in inverted commas, to eat. So if you remember from school biology lessons, you may well have learnt that animals are divided into 3 categories: carnivore, herbivore and omnivore. Unfortunately, that is a gross oversimplification. And that is what leads to a lot of people being confused when they try to categorise humans, because they think, well, we don't eat leaves or grass, so we can't be a herbivore. And we don't just eat animals, so we can't be a carnivore, so we must be an omnivore. We're not. Spoiler alert. So, let's look at this in more detail. So, for example, since we started talking about cats, I think we all know cats, well, they eat other animals. Clearly, you can look at their wild ancestors when we're talking about domestic cats, and you can see that. But if, I don't know, an alien was suddenly looking at cats for the first time and wanted to know what their diet was, well, apart from observation, looking at the actual cat, how would we know that? Well, the very first thing you've probably noticed, the most obvious thing, is their teeth. And we're not just talking, sharp canine teeth. If you look at a cat next time it yawns, you will notice every tooth in their mouth is designed for shearing flesh. They are incredibly vicious looking little gnashers. And this actually does differ in different animals that we might think of as carnivorous. I mean, you can actually see that, for example, a dog has some pretty sharp gnashers, but they don't look quite as savage as a cat's. And of course, a dog is more omnivorous. They tend to be carnivorous in the wild, but they can actually eat sort of vegetables, and indeed can actually be vegetarian and be perfectly healthy, which a cat cannot. And that's, because you could argue categorising animals is a little bit overly simplistic anyway, but there are degrees within each group. So, what other things about a cat might indicate, their natural diet? Well, there's various other things that would typify a carnivorous animal. So, for example, just the way that their mouth opens. How wide does it open? Again, watch your cat yawning. It's incredibly wide opening. Now, that is so that it can get a good bite onto another animal. You can't open your mouth that wide. Try it and see. As I say, the teeth, they're all sharp. They have huge fangs, right? Look at a tiger, you see, the bigger the cat, obviously the bigger the teeth are overall, so you see the difference is greater. It's more noticeable. But in all cases, they have huge canines. They also have very sharp, pointed incisors, and all of the rest of them, even their molars, everything is pointed. It's for shearing flesh. Also, the way their mouth opens, the way that the lower jaw is actually fixed to the top, there's no lateral mobility. So in other words, they can't move their mouth, their jaw from side to side, the way that you can. Right? You can wobble your lower jaw from side to side. Carnivorous animals tend not to be able to do that because, again, they're just biting and tearing. They don't need to sort of grind it up, whatever they're eating. For that reason, they don't even tend to chew their food at all. They bite a bit and they just swallow it. Now, because they don't tend to chew their food, that obviously differs with how their saliva works. So they have very small salivary glands. The saliva is acid. And all of this it's helping to break down the massively high protein content they've got. They also have incredibly strong stomach acid, so the hydrochloric acid in their stomach, very, very strong. And then when we look more detail at the digestion, we can see other certain key factors. They don't require any fibre in their diet to stimulate the peristalsis. So in other words, their digestive system functions without any fibre whatsoever. So that they can just eat meat, which does not contain fibre. They can also metabolize a huge amount of cholesterol and vitamin A. Now, and that's in its animal form of retinol. Now, you probably know, oh, cholesterol's terrible for you, all of this. Yes, if a human were to eat the sort of diet that a cat would naturally eat, it would kill them. The amount of cholesterol is going to completely block your arteries, as you probably know, but also because vitamin A is entirely toxic. Now, vitamin A, when it's in its form of retinol, it's a fat-soluble vitamin, so you store it. Your liver has to process it out. Now, a tiny amount you can use, and it's necessary for survival, yes. However, any excess is going to be stored in your liver, and as that builds up, your liver becomes full of poison. Now, you may have heard this famous thing about, oh, you don't eat a polar bear's liver because it would kill you. Well, any carnivorous animal, its liver is going to be so full of poison, vitamin A, that yes, of course it would kill you. If that were to happen to you, your liver would stop functioning. But carnivorous animals have a specially adapted liver so they can store all that vitamin A and it doesn't harm them. So that is an important distinction which carnivorous animals have to possess. Now, because of the way that amount of protein and so on and lack of fibre and all of that is processed, the carnivorous animals, generally their intestine is about 1.5 to 3 times their body length. Their colon is quite small, it's alkaline, neutralising that acid, and their digestion generally takes 2 to 4 hours. So that overall defines carnivorous animals. Now, as I say, there are some variations within that, of course, because you don't necessarily lump all carnivorous animals together. Which is why you have ones like cats who have very specific nutrient needs that can only be met from animals. Dogs, on the other hand, they are carnivorous animals, but they can actually meet their nutrient needs from vegetables, if needed to be. Not sure how they feel about it. So, if we look at, say, another group of animals, I think we can all agree that clearly humans do not fit into that category at all. But this is where many people get confused. And they argue that, well, no, humans are obviously omnivores. Well, if we look at what defines actual omnivores, and this includes animals that people often think of as carnivorous, for example, bears fit into this category. And if you look at their teeth, you will see that, again, they actually share a lot in common with carnivorous animals. And that's because they're also eating meat. So they have to be adapted to do that. So they will have very large, sharp fangs. Again, they have the same kind of incisors that carnivorous animals do. Sometimes their molars is the only place it really differs. They may have a combination of the blade type ones that carnivores have, or they may have crushing ones, which herbivores would have. But generally, all of the front of their teeth would kind of basically look the same as carnivorous animals. Now, again, they usually have a very wide mouth opening and no lateral movement of the jaw. Again, because they need to be able to bite into animals, just the same as carnivorous animals. They also tend to have the same small salivary glands. They have the very acid saliva. Again, they'll have the same strong hydrochloric acid, and again, they'll be able to metabolize huge amounts of cholesterol and vitamin A, because otherwise they couldn't eat animal flesh. They also don't require fibre for their digestion. So again, they can survive off meat without eating plants. Their intestine is usually a similar length to carnivorous animals. Again, their colon is very short. alkaline. And their digestion usually takes a bit longer, so it could be anywhere from 6 to 10 hours because they're usually eating some plants in there as well. But they can sort of manage either diet. Now, what's interesting is so many people will try and argue that, well, yeah, humans are omnivores. And when you ask sort of, well, what evidence they have for that, the thing that they usually come up with is, well, they have canine teeth. Well, all animals have canine teeth, actually. It's not really the point. If you go through all of those things, you realise actually omnivorous animals do not have canine teeth. No, they have fangs, and sharp incisors as well, and all of those other things that we've talked about, none of which fit the human diet. Where people get confused is the third category they tend to talk about is just herbivore. And that is supposed to cover everybody. Now, when you talk about the classic herbivore, that is an animal that eats usually either grass, grazing animals, or browsing on foliage, on trees, all those kinds of things. And they tend to sort of lump them all together. So the characteristics there, obviously they tend to have a small mouth opening. They have a lot of lateral movement of the jaw because they're grinding food. Think about like a cow or a rabbit or something. You'll see them doing that a lot. Obviously, their canines have become blunt and fairly rudimentary. They have very big flattened incisors and molars. All of their teeth are very strong and flat for grinding up vegetation. They chew their food a lot, and that starts the digestive process, and so therefore their salivary glands are much bigger. They have alkaline saliva, and it's different. The compounds that they have in it will obviously be different in order to digest vegetation. Now, hydrochloric acid is usually much weaker. Their digestion needs fibre in order to get going, so it comes from the plants, obviously. They can only metabolize a very small amount of both cholesterol and vitamin A, because it's not naturally found in their diet. Now, they have incredibly long intestines, up to 20 times their body length. Their colon is also much, much longer. It's acid. And the digestion can take an inordinately long time. It can take 24 to 48 hours. Now, in particular, animals that eat grass predominantly, they have come up with some fantastic ways of digesting. Think of a cow with its multiple stomachs, or rabbits who will eat their food and then eat it again, because grass is very, very undigestible. So when people think, well, that defines a herbivore, it's quite obvious that humans don't fit into that category, so therefore, we don't seem to fit into anyone. But of course, as I said at the beginning, this is overly simplistic. And there are plenty of other animals that fit into specialised niches. Think of an insectivore, for example, which is technically a kind of carnivore. It's eating animals, but it's clearly quite different. You also have very specialist kinds of omnivores. Think of rodents, for example, with their various special adaptations that they have. Like, if you think of a squirrel that eats nuts, it is a rodent, it is actually an omnivore, but it's specialised in that little niche. All rodents have teeth that grow continually throughout their life because they tend to eat very hard kind of food that wears them down for one reason and another. But a lot of rodents will specialise in sort of nuts and seeds and that kind of area as their main diet. So there are obviously lots of specific groups that we could go into, and within the herbivore group as well, there is one particular category which is very, very relevant to us, and that is the frugivore. Now, technically frugivores are herbivores, but they're really a separate category because really, as I say, they're not, those groupings are just too simplistic. Now, frugivores, as I say, they differ slightly in that they're most similar to the herbivores, as I say, but they do have a few specific characteristics. So, their mouth opening again is usually quite small. They have the lateral movement of the jaw. It may not be as much as herbivores because they don't have to do so much grinding of food. Their teeth are obviously quite different. So they do have the big flattened incisors and the flattened molars, but because they're not grinding up grass, they don't have to be as extreme. They also have residual canines. Now they have various uses. They can actually be used for sort of defending themselves if necessary, but they're more, to be honest, used for cracking hard nuts and that sort of thing, getting into fruit. They are, let's say, residual, so they are canine teeth, but they would be absolutely useless for tearing animal flesh. Certainly not used for that. They share the sort of herbivore, most of the herbivore features. They have the large salivary glands, they have alkaline saliva, they have various compounds there for digesting for digesting plants. They have the weak hydrochloric acid, they need fibre for the digestion to work, and they can metabolize only small amounts of cholesterol and vitamin A, just like herbivores. Now their intestines are usually a bit shorter. Okay, they still have quite the long acid colon, but their intestines don't need to be quite so long because they are not eating the grass or the leaves. That is the general characteristic of herbivores. And so as a result, the digestion goes a little bit slower. There's another important distinction, which is their ability to metabolize cellulose. Cellulose obviously is that sort of plant fibre found in the sort of cell walls of plants. Herbivores proper can metabolize that, whereas carnivores and omnivores can't. Frugivores can't either. And that's why eating leaves and grass is not necessarily the way forward. It's an interesting point though, because we're always being told how green leafy vegetables are so good for us, but it's worth remembering we can't digest cellulose. So actually, if you just eat a spinach leaf, your body cannot break down all in that spinach. And that's why we either cook spinach or we put it into a smoothie. And you will get, some people sort of like, oh, well, it's better to eat things in their natural sense. It's all raw. That is true up to a point. But as I say, it is always worth remembering we're not designed to digest plants. What we are designed to digest is fruit. Because the natural diet of a frugivore is, of course, fruit. Supplemented with some vegetables and nuts and seeds, because obviously fruit contains seeds. So you would eat the whole fruit, you would eat the seeds as well. Now, you can clearly see, as I say, the frugivore diet, particularly rife amongst primates. Another interesting feature, which not strictly related to digestion, but which tends to define frugivores, is their prehensile hands. And the reason being, so you can open a banana. Now, it probably won't surprise you to know that, yes, humans do tick every one of those boxes for the frugivore diet. There are also other features which people sometimes list to do with sort of their alkaline urine as opposed to the acid that carnivores and omnivores would have. There are, you could go on and on and on, sort of refining these groups. But ultimately, the important takeaway is that everything about human biology is geared towards digesting fruit, with nuts, seeds, and a few vegetables. And the reason for that really is just because, well, when you're ripping fruit off the tree, you're probably going to swallow the odd leaf with it, So when you hear people sort of saying, well, I don't know what is the best diet to be healthy. Well, if it's a simple matter for determining how to keep your cat healthy, you need to feed it meat, because that's what cats eat. It should be equally simple that the way to keep a human healthy is to feed it fruit, because that's what humans eat. Now, strangely, there have been very limited studies into an actual so-called fruitarian diet. It is widely vilified by sort of doctors who generally have not studied nutrition, incidentally. Sort of, oh, well, that can't possibly be healthy, just eating fruit. I mean, I've only read 2 actual research papers of clinical trials, and both were quite limited sample sizes. I mean, they had people eating a diet of purely fruit, and a large amount of it because they were getting all their calories from fruit with some nuts and seeds. And certainly in both of them, the people were incredibly healthy at the end of it. I mean, certainly one of them was trying to answer the question of how much fruit is too much fruit. Basically, how much do you need to raise your blood sugar? They never answered that question because all of the people had far better blood sugar levels at the end of the study than at the beginning. Probably because fruit does not raise your blood sugar, and that is a whole side issue. But fructose is processed completely differently by the body, and does not affect blood sugar, which unfortunately, of course, led to this total abuse. People in the US had the idea that, well, in that case, we could just sweeten everything with synthetic fructose and it won't cause diabetes. Well, of course, it does, because if you take fructose in isolation and combine it with synthetic chemicals and then pump it into things that aren't fruit, it does absolutely terrible things to blood sugar, so don't do that. And do not ever eat anything with high fructose corn syrup in if you live in the US. Fortunately, it's not found here in the UK, so you're alright. But yes, unfortunately that has then led to a backlash of people thinking, oh, fructose is terrible for you. No, it is not. Fruit does not affect blood sugar in a healthy person. The only way it can affect your blood sugar is if you have completely destroyed your hormones, or are very ill. Obviously, people with diabetes have to be careful of any food. But for all healthy people, it is worth remembering that fruit does not affect blood sugar. So, in summary, when we are thinking about, well, what is the most healthy diet that we can eat, I would always urge you to come back to the question of what is a human's natural diet? And the answer, inescapably, is fruit. So, your diet should be based on fruit.